Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for waiting. We would now like to begin the session. We would now like to introduce the moderator. So, Mr. Noriyuki Matsuda, founder and CEO of SOURCENEXT Corporation. And he's also the director of Japan Association of New Economy. So these are the panelists for this session from Singapore. Mr. Beh Swan Gin, chairman of the Singapore Economic Development Board. Next is Mr. Arvind Gupta, CEO of MyGov India. And also Mr. Hurst Lin, co-founder of DCM China and general partner. So Mr. Matsuda, the floor is yours. Good afternoon. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So today we would like to talk about the mobile economy in Asia. So, of course, we would have the closing session after this, but this is the final breakout session. So with these brilliant panelists, we would like to move on with this session. So today we have panelists from Singapore, India, and China, the three major countries in Asia we cannot disregard. So first of all, from Singapore, the chairman of Singapore Economic Development Board, we have Mr. Beh Swan Gin. So EDB really represents the entity that has created Singapore. So on a per capita basis, GDP is the top in Asia, almost double vis-a-vis the level of Japan. And also from India, we have Mr. Arvind Gupta. He was actually here 2 years ago. So of 1.3 billion population in India, now it's been registered under their own My Number system, their own ID system. So we expect to hear quite a splendid story from India. And finally, from China, we have Mr. Hurst Lin. So he is the co-founder of DCM China and also SOURCENEXT. So back in 2000, they have actually been listed in NASDAQ. So SINA, S-I-N-A. This was the first IPO of its kind from China. So he would share with us the latest trend from China. So these are the brilliant panelists that I will be progressing today. And I'm quite honored to be here. So let me first start off by saying, what is the purpose of this session? What is the objective? So mobile, there are different forms. So especially we would like to highlight on the cashless ratio for payment. Because in Japan, quite often cash is valued as a means of payment. So some of the complaints we hear from the tourists coming to Japan, quite often they raise the issue with language and so forth, but also this use of cash has been a major source of complaint for tourists. So right now, 20% is the cashless payment ratio in Japan. So Korea, it's 95, 96%. So almost all cashless society has been achieved. Now, US and the UK, it's about 50 to 60%. India, it's 40%. And China, it's 60%. So Japan is quite an exception in terms of the level of cashless payment. So we would like to change this. And that is why we would like to hear the more of the story, what is going on. So,
Swan Gin? Yeah, could you share with us a little bit about the smart nation you are driving for in Singapore?
Well, thank you. Firstly, thank you for inviting me to be participating in NEST 2018. It's a privilege and an honor. I'm very happy to share a little bit about Smart Nation, which is the Singapore government's effort to look at how we can make sure that digitalization can be very much part of the new capability in Singapore. And I would describe it broadly as comprising of three things. The first is what can we do to upgrade our economy and make sure that digitalization is pervasive. And one example of it is the work that my agency does. And this is how we are working very closely with the manufacturers in Singapore to adopt to embrace the fourth industrial revolution, to adopt internet IoT, as well as to make sure industrial IoT, as well as to make sure that they embrace robotics into their operations. And this is a very ambitious and aggressive effort by the government to push digitalization in the economy, and manufacturing is just one example. The second area that we are concentrating on is how can the government further digitalize our services to the citizens. And again, I'll use one example. For many years, we already have a digital ID system for doing transactions with government. So as a citizen, I have a digital ID. The problem was twofold. First, it was not mandatory, and two, it was primarily for web-based services. And over the course of the last 24 months, we've pushed aggressively to make sure all government services are mobile-friendly, so mobile first. And then at the same time, we strengthen the digital identity by bringing in two-factor authentication. So that's an example of the second thing we are doing. How do we digitalize our government services? And the third thing is to look at areas where the market is not so efficient to solve, and where government can come in to help maybe organize a little bit better, to put in place infrastructure. And the issue of cashless payment is an issue that we are also worried about. Like Japan, Singapore only has 20% cashless payment utilization. So we have done three things there. The first is we have got all the three major banks in Singapore to agree to adopt a back-end system, a technology that allows for all of us now to do peer-to-peer exchange of money, transfer of money, using only your mobile phone number. So if I know your mobile phone, Nori-san, and you have a Singapore bank account, I can transfer money to you just doing this. Right?
That's great.
So that's one that we have done. The second thing is we look at the point of sales devices in all the shops. And if even in Japan, you go to the shops, they have 3, 4, 5 point of sales devices. It's very cumbersome. And if you are a small retailer, this is quite a huge expense. So what we have done is to now put in place a unified point of sales, so that if you're a retailer, you only need one. We've started to roll this out only the past 3 months, and we hope to make this the pervasive and again the standard of use. So just some examples of what we are doing under Smart Nation: strengthen the economy, improve government services to the people, and third, to fill in the gaps where the market is not being efficient.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. So Arvind, great to have you again. Could you share with us last 2 years updates? It looks like you have done phenomenal things.
Can I have the presentation, please? Yeah, there it is. Thank you for having me again. I was here 2 years ago. Facebook reminded me I was here 2 years ago. So it's a little scary that Facebook reminded me of that, but it's pleasant to be here. As you said, we are a nation of 1.3 billion people, and I will like to present a few things that we have done in India and where we stand today. India, in the last 2 years, has actually really changed a lot. One thing that this audience may know or may not know, on November 8th, 2016, the United States were electing a new president. That is the day the elections were happening in the US. But India did something more remarkable. We removed the 86% of the currency from our system. And in 50-day period, we changed it to new currency. I think from a policy perspective, you ask, what have we done? We've changed our currency. Whole nation of 1.3 billion people changed the currency in 50 days to absolutely new currency. Now, I will explain why that is important and how the digital infrastructure that we had built got put to use around that time. As of right now, Nori-san, we have 1.3 billion people. 1.2 billion people have a mobile connection, so almost universal. We have 1.2 billion people having a digital identity, a biometrically verifiable identity in India. Friends, this is the biggest platform in the world today, which is not owned by a private company. There are only 10 systems in the world which have billion users. 9 of them are owned by private companies, Google, Facebook, Tencent, and a lot of others. This is a platform which is owned by the people of India, by the public. It's a public good. We have 500 million unique bank accounts. And I will explain to you how 42% of Indian population didn't have a bank account and how they got access to a bank account in less than 1 year. And rest of the other numbers. What I present is what our colleague from Singapore was talking about. India has really leapfrogged using digital technology, digital infrastructure at par with energy, transport, social, city infrastructure. We have created a digital infrastructure where in the less than 4 to 5 years, identity, which is called, I think in Japan, My Number. Yes, digital identity is now available to everybody. And this is a public good. This is not owned by a particular company. And this is used for government, this is used for businesses, this is used for authenticating any transaction. And we have connected this with a payment layer and a paperless layer. Now, why this is important is that using this architecture as a public good, we have created an internet of payments. As my colleague was explaining from Singapore, you can have a mobile number at the rate. The way we send email today is something XYZ at the rate Rakuten.com. I can send a payment, my mobile number at the rate mybank.com. And that's a payment address we have created for the country. It's called the Internet of Payments. And it's linked to your identity system. So it's not only cashless, but we have also gone cardless. And what we have achieved via this is a complete financial inclusion. Today, in the world of financial inclusion, we opened, Nori-san, 310 million bank accounts, zero balance bank accounts. Okay. 310 million bank accounts. 210 million in less than 1 year.
Less than a year, wow.
Less than 1 year. It's the biggest financial inclusion of all times. But it is low-touch banking, means high technology, low touch. That's how you can have zero balance bank accounts. And the average balance is $100. So you need to have very low-cost bank accounts, and technology needs to play a very big role. Aadhaar, I explained. Aadhaar, my friends, is the digital identity that every Indian has. It uses your biometrics to authenticate yourself, iris and your fingerprints, and you can authenticate yourself using that. Lastly, you talk about cashless. In India, as I said, we went from a policy decision around November 2016 of doing demonetization. We had the infrastructure in place. The biggest lesson is the infrastructure was already in place. UPI, the mobile phone, has become so pervasive in India. 50% of Indian population has a smartphone. It's growing at 110 million smartphones a year. 50% still does not have a smartphone. But our payment platform, which connects, as I said, Internet of Payments, all banks with any bank, and it's real time, and it's zero cost. I can do a transaction to you at zero cost, real time. And that changes everything. And just to give you a reference, we went up from 100,000 transactions in November 2016 to last month, 200 million transactions on this platform. So you can, in a very short span of time, adopt digital. And India has really become a digital first, mobile first economy, especially from a payments perspective. I think the last thing I want to mention is that the public infrastructure that we have created, public good digital infrastructure, is not only being used by government for delivering money into the people's, welfare money into people's bank account. Two, it is being used by banks for fintech, for KYC, for anything related to banking. But three, it is being used by businesses. And I think that's very, very important. When you sign up for a new mobile connection, you have to give them identity proof. In India, you just come, give your identity number, and authenticate yourself using iris or your thumb. And in less than a minute, you can open a new bank account or a new mobile connection. The world record is 56 seconds right now. And because of that, not only the new low-touch banking, but a new mobile operator enrolled 110 million customers in 180 days, Reliance Jio. It's a case study. So, friends, the point I'm making is we have a digital infrastructure which is now a public good. Governments are using it, society is using it, businesses are using it, and banks are using it. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you. It's quite phenomenal. Hurst, in terms of cashless payment, what's the biggest phenomenon in China?
Well, first of all, I can't speak for China because I don't represent China. I'm just an individual, and I can't even speak for, everything. I'm just seeing a VC in a tech investment. So just caveat that I cannot speak for China. Don't take what I said as what China is. Nowhere. I'm not from EDB, who represents Singapore for sure, and I'm just a plain old VC and a startup entrepreneur. So having said that, first question is it really good to go cashless? Personally, I don't necessarily think so, because one thing with cashless is you lose your privacy. In order for you to be able to pay cashless, you gotta have an ID number, and therefore, somebody knows where you spend your money, who you are, where you are. Any given time you spend your money, somebody knows where you are, who you are at all times. So I'm not saying it's a goal, but everything else has compromises. You get something, you give up something. So one thing that people have to struggle with is if you go cashless, you give up your privacy. So don't feel so bad if Japan has only 20% cashless transaction, because at least 80% of the other times, people actually don't know what the hell you're doing, which sometimes is good. Okay. In China, unfortunately, we are going to very rapidly into a cashless society, and that's because it's convenience. At the end of the day, it's convenience. Transaction cost goes down to almost infinitesimal small. Because the whole digital economy, the whole digitalization of our lives is to make things cheaper, easier, and so on. So in cashless, on WeChat Pay, for those of you who travel to China, you know that we're all using either Alipay or WeChat Pay, primarily WeChat Pay. People, any two-person on the streets, and I was joking that even beggars can come up and ask you, they take a QR code and they say, just scan this, right? And then you can give them 1 penny if you want. Because the cost of a digitalization of cash payment goes to almost zero, and that's the reason why many of the business models in China does not work in the United States or in Japan, is because micropayment is not that cheap. But once you go to cashless society in China, again, I don't speak for China. Let's just say cashless transaction becomes more prevalent in China. It means you are able to pay one another, you and me, anybody, at a very low cost, and therefore you can pay in pennies. So you see a beggar on the street, you reach into your pocket, you feel generous, but you take out his 100 RMB bill and say, no, do I really want to give him 100 RMB? But if he does have a QR code, you can give him 1 RMB, right? Because he's not going to have he's not going to have a credit card reader for sure, right? But he can have his QR code, or he can have his, whatever. If you have a WeChat account, he just scan his WeChat account, give him 1 RMB. So that's the thing about cashless transactions or digital transaction, is that the cost of transaction goes down to very, very minimal, and the convenience of it becomes so great for all of us. All of us, virtually all of us, well, at least more so in China, that people are able to do things. People are able to, split a rent. Like you can split the rent by minutes if you want. People have roommates, kids come out of college, they have roommates, they can be roommate for 2 days, roommate for 3 days, because you know what, you just split your rent, because you can, there are business models in China where you can split rents for a few days. Because again, it's on WeChat payment. It's so easy, right? You just have the formula in there saying you pay X, I pay Y, and we count it by days. It's never going to count by minutes. I don't think so, at least. But you can go by days. Whereas it does not happen in America. I know for sure. It doesn't happen in America. If you want to be roommate with someone, you've got to pay 2 months deposit first, and then you got to pay the first month and whatever, da-di-da-di-da. In China, because you have WeChat Pay, the landlord takes WeChat, right? You take WeChat, everybody takes WeChat, and you can split the bill right down the middle. You go to a restaurant, you don't need waiters anymore, because, everybody gets assigned to a seat in a restaurant, right? So, you sit down in a table, and you order, like, I don't know, whatever, 3 dishes, one dish of fish, 1 dish of meat, and maybe some veggies and so on. So when it's time for you to go, you just scan the QR code on your table, and you're ready to go. Because the QR code, they know which seat you're sitting at, and therefore they know your bill. And you just scan it, you go. That is something that has happened very, very rapidly in the last 12 months in Beijing and Shanghai.
Only 12 months.
In 12 months.
Oh.
Yeah, in 12 months. 12 months ago, in the restaurant, you still have very, very bad service from the waiters and waitresses. I gotta pay, excuse me, check please. And it's like, they don't come to you, right? And you gotta wait like freaking 10 minutes. And you say, should I just get up and go? Because they obviously don't care if you pay them, right? Now, they don't even come, because you just scan the QR code on your table and get up and go. So it reduces the transaction cost and it increases the convenience. And that is happening very rapidly in China. Obviously that's what the session is about, where the other countries, they're hoping to get that convenience, get that transaction cost lower so more things can be done, et cetera, et cetera. Society can become more efficient, people can have more services open to them. And I say yes to all of that. And I'm a VC, I make money every time there is a new model. I love that. But also you need to understand, when you go cashless, you give up your privacy. Leave it at that.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, what is the biggest reason this happened within 12 months? What was the difference?
Well, because the messaging as a platform, WeChat really is omnipotent. It's ever present. Everybody uses WeChat. You go into, I cannot see all of you, but I know if this was in China, only the first people, the front row, actually are not using their WeChat. Everybody else after the front row is looking at their WeChat. So it's like whoever is boring for like 20 seconds, I'm going to be checking my WeChat, right? So it's WeChat is ever present. We have speakers who are on a table here, and when he's talking, I'm checking my WeChat. I said, oh, is it my turn? Oh, okay. Well, what did you say? Oh, okay, all right. Right? So, because people are addicted to their social, their messaging platform everywhere. So therefore, because it is ever present, it makes, once the payment is coupled with your messaging system, it makes paying so much easier. And once people, it's also a question of learning curve. Before it was only the young, the 17-year-old, 18-year-old, 20-year-old, now is the grandpa, grandma knowing how to do it. And I think that is probably the biggest reason why you see fewer and fewer waiters and waitresses in restaurant. And you see fewer and you have automatic checkout counter now. You just scan it, you go, you leave.
Okay, Arvind, anything to add?
I think what our VC friend from Shanghai is sharing is actually pretty correct. The fundamental reason, I think, why every country, like in China, they're seeing in the last 12 months, in India, it was driven by a policy change, but it is also a consumer behavior change. If it is not a consumer behavior change, the cash will come back. I think, in my opinion, the old payments model was broken. Paying 3 to 4% transaction cost is unviable. And that's why merchants did not want to go on a digital payment system.
Yeah, that's happening in Japan. Yeah,
And it
that's the
is
biggest
simple
reason.
maths. It's business model. The cost of cash to the system is very high, but to the merchant it's zero, perceivedly zero. You pay 100 yen or 1,000 yen, you get 1,000 yen. If you do the same transaction on a debit card, let's say, or a credit card, it's 3 to 4%. So you get 960 only instead of 1,000. Now, if your profit margin is 8%, so out of 80, 40 you have lost.
Yeah.
It's the business model was broken. And with digital infrastructure, that business model, the old business model has been fixed, I think. Now, if you want to get 1,000, you get 1,000. And that is what I think is happening in countries like China and India.
Yeah, but how did you implement that? You said there's no cost, right? You said that it's. How did you implement that?
See, with digital, and two things. Number one, let me just back off. There's a law called Moore's law. Moore's law. Anybody knows Moore's law? Some people, yes. Moore's law says that computing power doubles every 18 months. It also says that same computer becomes half the price in 18 months. It is, in my opinion, broken. Now, computing power is doubling. Price is reducing by half every 12 months, 9 to 12 months. Now, because of that, what has happened is that the cost of digital infrastructure has become very, very low. And to do this incremental transaction, the cost is so little that, as our colleague was explaining, to do a penny transaction, the cost is very, very minimalistic. So you can bring down the cost. There is a very little incremental cost. And there is no rent seeking. What India has done is that we have made this infrastructure public good. It's like sending an email. When you send an email from X to Y, does it cost you anything?
No.
There lies your answer. Payment is like an email. Transaction from account 1 to account 2. That's it. So we have made the cost zero.
Okay. Swan Gin, anything to add?
Yeah, I wanted to add on both what Hurst and Arvind have elaborated, and saying the obvious, which is that cashless payments really provide for financial inclusion. And financial inclusion in the context of Southeast Asia is terribly important to really bring forth the full potential of the rising middle class in Southeast Asia. In Indonesia, the number of credit card users it's less than 5%. If I'm not wrong, it's actually in the 3+%. The unbanked is about 65%. But the number of smartphone users is at about 50%. And if you just look at the growth of e-commerce, it has doubled in Indonesia from 2015 to 2017, and the growth rate is in the high double digits. What it's done is that the ease of payment, because of all this low-cost convenience of cashless payment systems, it has allowed many of the middle class to participate and really be able to consume. And that's one way that the economies in Southeast Asia are thriving.
Thank you. Yeah. So in order to increase the percentage of cashless payment, what has your country taken?
So I gave two examples. One, of course, is to really intervene where the market is failing. So what was happening was that each of our 3 large banks were coming up with their own system to allow you to transfer money just using a mobile number. So we basically came in to forge a consensus on an interoperable system. So that's one thing that government can do actively, right? Okay. Then I mentioned about the point of sale system. Another one, which is in some sense addressed at payment systems that use the QR code. So likewise, you know, when you have a small market like Singapore, and you have different systems that's competing, there's no scale. And when you have no scale, you don't get consumers to adopt it widely. So again, we came in to forge a standard called SGQR, Singapore QR standard, which really, again, is about interoperability between the different QR systems. So those are some of the ways in which the government has come in to help promote adoption of cashless payments. Because unlike India, I suppose there were already many private sector players who were introducing all these in Singapore, and we wanted to not get in their way, but actually to support and enable them.
Okay, thanks. Arvind, how about in India?
So, as I said, number one, what we ensured is that every family had a bank account. Banking became, in a way, a right for everybody. So that banking for all, which I just showed you a slide on 310 million bank accounts. And these are no-frill, zero-balance bank accounts. This was essential because if you don't have a bank account, you can't do transactions. So we ensured a bank account for everybody, and one in each family. 2, we made banking very light touch, high tech, right? And 3, we ensured this is your bank right here. Not an iPhone, but an Android phone also, a candy bar phone.
Make sure you don't run out of battery.
You know, you always ask me, and I wish I had that, which nobody uses probably in this room. Anybody has that non-smartphone? The non-smartphone, the $8, $10 phone? We made sure our technology works on that.
Okay.
It's not only smartphone. It works on all phones. And because it is so low cost, we made sure that the banks can afford it. Otherwise, the cost of banking was very high. So that's why it became a public good, public infrastructure. So those are the things we did. And I think incentivizing behavior for merchants to move away from these multiple POS machines to a integrated machine, a QR code. We actually implemented it first in India, a Bharat QR code, integrated QR code. And the last thing which is still happening, it's not over, is using data now that is being generated. And I agree, whenever you have a digital transaction, you leave a footprint. So there is a footprint you're leaving somewhere. Who uses is I disagree that it's a violation of privacy because you have control. Data is owned by the consumer, and you control it. But the last thing we did is made credit decisions now, microcredit decisions on data. Because India, again, like many Southeast Asian countries, was a very unbanked, underserved country in terms of credit. 100 million loans, credit loans, small, medium, short-term loans have been given now using the data that is getting generated for your transactions. So we made an incentive for shopkeepers to do more digital transactions because if they needed a small working capital loan, it was available on the basis of their transactions. The disadvantage with cash is that you have no history also. So you cannot prove your credit worthiness. Here you could, by consent, share your credit, your transaction history, and then say, give me credit. And the banks opened up for credit now.
Okay, thanks. Hurst?
Well, again,
You're not.
I will be a little bit contrarian. You know, all about inclusions, about the poor people who have no business of taking out loans. You know, you're going to give them loans, you're going to have a lot of defaults. So a lot of loan companies in China, and there are many of them, actually many of them have many, many $1 billion of market cap. And we also have invested in Indonesia where, again, we give out loans to poor people who normally won't get loans from the banks. Now, what do the poor people have to give up in return? We need to know where you live. Because where you live actually is the best determination of how much you're going to be able to pay. And when you claim where you live, and then I track you 24/7, and if I see between the hours of 11 p.m. and 7 a.m., you're not where you said you are, then that means you're sleeping somewhere else, and therefore you don't live where you live. And when you say where you work, I also check between the hours of 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. to see, are you generally in that area, in the building that you said? If you're not, I know you're lying. So by knowing who you talk to, what things you're looking at, what kind of transaction you do, and what time you wake up, what time you stop browsing your browsers, what time you're looking at, I actually know everything about you. And therefore, I don't need the traditional credit history that you go, the FICO score. I don't need the FICO score. With the phone, you're telling me everything about yourself. You're not knowing it, especially poor people don't realize that, but it is one way to give them access to capital. So there's a trade-off because they would normally not get that from the bank. But if I know where you live, where you wake up, where you go to, and so on and so forth, or what you're looking at, who are your friends' credit histories, and so on, I know I can make an educated guess about what kind of money I can give you. So that's, again, it's a trade-off, and I think the society needs to know as it moves forward with this trade-off, it does provide access to capital to a lot of so-called unbanked, underbanked, less banked, whatever you want to call it, but there has to be an understanding, a very smart way of going about it. And I think digitalization of currency, digitalization of financial assets, it is really, a way of making it available to everybody. But there is, you have to understand what you're getting into.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Arvind?
I will disagree, first of all, with that. I will totally disagree because it is a question of sharing.
But that's how it's done, though.
Well, not in India.
Okay, fine.
So we are not Facebook. So we want. I think there are a lot other data points that are available to make a credit decision. Our experience so far has been very, very good. We don't take. I mean, and we means the startups now. This are mostly done by startups. Algorithm companies have now working with credit companies to give access to credit. Generally, it is private and startups who are doing that. But what do they it is coming leapfrogging. They did not have any digital transactions before. Suddenly, they have digital transactions. So imagine a shopkeeper. He or she, small shopkeeper, can now prove actually that they do $1 million, which is $150,000, $15,000 a month worth of transactions, and know what kind of revenue they do, and share that at a metadata level to be able to get better credit, a lower working capital loan. They were actually being abused by loan sharks in giving them 36% annual loans. Today, they can get the same working capital loans at 8 to 10%. Mm-hmm. So it is, but on the other side, the big brother that he presents, I don't disagree. If somebody wants to misuse that, anybody can do that. But we don't, that's not the model that we are following, number one. Number two, I think it is very, very important to understand that a lot of cash in many countries is used for activities which are unsocial, which are evading taxes. Mm-hmm. So the government has an incentive to build this for really realizing the right taxes also. Mm-hmm. That's the bigger interest of the government. The credit and giving credit is a business of the banks and startups, not the governments.
Mm-hmm. Swan Gin, what do you think about the tax evasions?
I don't know. I think in Singapore that's not been a concern. I think our ability to collect taxes have been fairly strong. Again, primarily because we have digitalized a lot of the processes. Yeah. But I thought I should just maybe changing the subject if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course.
I thought that in terms of digitalizing the economy, a very important issue that all of us, including friends in Japan, is how you bring about the existing companies, the existing workforce with you, because this is a fairly disruptive change. That word is of course overused, but it is not a trivial matter. And in Singapore, for us, a big focus of our Smart Nation effort is how we are bringing the micro SMEs and the workforce along us through retraining. And this requires what I call grunt work. You really have go down to the ground, working with the different companies, working with the workers, to help train them to become a lot more digitally confident. In the manufacturing sector, for instance, it's very easy to say, okay, if I'm an aerospace company and I want to employ IoT and big data and so on, let's go out and recruit the comp science graduates and so on. But in fact, the best people to help in that transition of your company from analog to a digital operation will really be your employees who already have the domain expertise, but they need training. And that's where, again, the Singapore government is investing a lot of our resources as part of the Smart Nation. It's about bringing your existing players in the economy, your workers, your workforce along with you as you digitalize the nation.
Okay, thank you.
I one comment to that. I would agree just now is the biggest obstacle to getting to a digital economy is unlearning. It's actually, in that sense, India and China have an advantage over advanced societies like United States and Japan, because India and China, most of the people don't have to unlearn credit card, because Americans and Japanese are already used to how to use a credit card. They are already used to it. So you're asking them to unlearn using a credit card and learning how to use a WeChat is actually no trivial task. And that's what Singapore faces with, is actually convincing the average population who said, I'm fine doing what I'm doing. I mean, why are you asking me to change? And I think that is the biggest obstacle to, if we talk about Japan, that might be one of the biggest obstacle for Japan as it tries to go to a more cashless society, is the concerted effort to unlearn what you already know, and the pain that you undergo to unlearn what you know and to learn something new in order to achieve something new. It is something that I think the society itself needs to make a decision on. Whereas in India and China, I mean, most people who use WeChat are the young people who never had a credit card, so they don't know what a credit card. I mean, how are you supposed to use it? So if you give them WeChat, you give them Alipay, they just use it, and then they don't know how to go to the bank to apply for a loan. If you give them a loan right in their phone and they can swipe it right away, they take it. But then for an older guy, you say, oh, when I have to get a loan, I have to go to a bank. I have to show up. I have to fill out an application. I got to do all of these. And they think about it and say, oh, it's too much work. So they don't apply for a loan.
Thank you.
So the biggest obstacle is unlearning. And also, as I said before before we started talking here on the stage, is the use case. I think in a lot of advanced countries, they don't have the use case. And you're trying to push it through a use case to the society, either by governments or by whatever, in a coalition or alliances, it's difficult. There has to be natural use cases for things to get adopted. The adoption requires use cases. That's it. That's the only thing I want to add.
Arvind, I'd like to have a couple of questions from the audience. Is that okay?
Can I just make one
Okay,
comment?
okay.
Very quick one. I think on this point, I agree with him, because on India also, this public infrastructure that I am talking about, the payment infrastructure, I guess WhatsApp is not so common in Japan, But India, almost everybody uses, instead of WeChat, we use WhatsApp. And WhatsApp is owned now by Facebook. But just to give you an example, WhatsApp is the most popular messenger in India, the messaging platform. Google and WhatsApp are front-ending India's payment system. So it's so pervasive, it's so open technology, open source, interoperable, that today you can make a payment on WhatsApp. And you can do, like you can do in WeChat, so we can also do a WhatsApp payment. So I agree, chat, when you integrate chat, messaging and payments, it becomes so easy to use that. So just to give that example.
Okay, thanks. I'd like to have a couple of questions from the audience. なんか質問いらっしゃいある方いらっしゃいますでしょうか。
Any questions from the audience? No questions at this point? No questions. Any burning questions at this moment? So the gentleman in the front row.
First of all, thank you very much for a very interesting session. The question that I would like to ask is, it sounds really amazing, and there's a couple of problems you guys are talking about, like privacy and so on. But living in Japan, I feel like what everyone thinking is the problem with a time of crisis. You know, when, for example, a big earthquake happens, and the phone lines, you know, it just becomes blocked. You know, and in Japan now, because it's, you know, there's cash, you can still do transactions, you can buy food, you can buy water, but in time of crisis, when that kind of cashless society, I think there's a big problem. So I would like to think what your thought on that.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. Every time I use DD in Beijing, I have to check how many bars I still have on my phone. I mean, you cannot leave the house without your phone fully charged because you already called DD and then it comes and you can't pay for it. So yes, it is a problem. And just bring extra batteries.
Yeah, if I can also add to that, at least in India, I wanted to add that before, but now I will say this. I don't think so there will be a society which will be cashless. It will be a less cash society. Right? The percentage will go from 40% to 50% to 60%, but it's not that for your safety, for emergency, for backup, you will not keep cash. People, I think we have a movement called less cash rather than cashless.
Thank you.
Similarly, in Singapore, our aim, of course, is for all government transactions to be possible through just e-payment systems. But we do not assume that all payments will be cashless. We assume there will be a substantial portion of the population who will still want to deal with cash. And you have to have the backup systems.
Thank you.
Thank you. 他にご質問ありますか？
Any other questions? No questions at this point? Okay, there are questions. Okay, yes, please.
Hi, I would like to ask for the India and the Singaporean representatives, how did you train the government employees, the public servants, in terms of what do they have to learn to push through all of these great agendas that you are fostering in your countries? Thank you.
Let me start because I suppose a smaller country a little bit easier to roll out some of these centrally. So for instance, all of us in the government right now, we have a program to make sure that every employee has training in the use of data. So this is almost like 101 of data analytics because this helps us then make better decisions using data. So it's just an example of how, at least in Singapore, because of how small we are, we can actually roll out centrally some of these programs. You know, we are only single level of government, so it's a little bit more straightforward.
I think it's the biggest challenge is that technology without the right people and the right processes will never succeed. I was in Silicon Valley before and I was taught always, people, process, technology. So we have the tech platforms. I think your question is very valid. We have the right policies also. How do you make people adopt the right processes? So change management has been the biggest thing to achieve. And so it's digitization by process. So we are taking one task at a time and doing that. And the way we are trying to look at it, if you heard Mark Benioff this afternoon, they started with a sales cloud and they went to service cloud and then the marketing cloud and the commerce cloud. We are doing government as a service. And we are going one process at a time, digitizing that and process by process. So divide and conquer algorithm of computer science, bigger problems. India is a very big country, 1.3 billion people. Many, many processes. So take one process, the cash process, bank cash in to cash out process was one process. Similarly, there are a lot of welfare payments. There is salary payments. There are so many processes which require digitization. So we are taking process by process, bigger processes, take smaller process out, digitize them, and that's how we are trying to do it.
Thank you. もう時間がそろ
I think it's time amount, so we'd like to this.
Swan Gin.
Maybe I'm going to steal something that Hurst said earlier, which is perhaps a suggestion is that in any of the technology or digitalization effort that Japan wants to push, identifying the use case is very important. I'll very quickly just give you one example in Singapore, and this relates to the use of autonomous vehicles, encouraging the development of autonomous vehicles. We have no automotive industry, right? So there's no Mercedes-Benz or Toyota who can benefit if the government encourages this. We don't want to have people owning cars because it's too many cars on the road will create congestion in Singapore. But the use case for Singapore for autonomous vehicle is the first mile and last mile, bringing people from their home to the train station to the office. How can we have autonomous vehicles complement buses, complement walking, to bring more people from the home to the train station in a convenient way so that we don't even have to own cars anymore? So that's a use case in Singapore that we've identified for autonomous vehicles, and that's driving forward this particular aspect of Smart Nation.
Thank you. Arvind?
Yeah, I think what I just said, that we are trying to, the government becomes a facilitator of disruption. Mm-hmm. It is the entrepreneurship, the startup mindset of the innovators' mindset inside the government. I think that is highly desired, and that is what has happened in India, led by a prime minister which believes in innovation. And I think it's top down from policy and decision making, but also bottom up from the youth demographics. Mm-hmm. And both of them combined, then this is an inevitable process. So, I would like to leave it that India, from being a land of snake charmers, today has become a land of a mobile first, digital as government as a service, and a country which aspires to innovate for the next 6 billion of the world. So. Mm-hmm. It's a mindset change.
Well, right. Hurst?
What to do next? I think what's done here is very good. What I observed Japan over the 10, 15 years is that I think in the last couple of years, I noticed Japanese have become much more innovative. Trust me, when I used to come to Japan 7, 8 years ago, you have one guy with a robot that can sing, and the next guy comes with a robot that can sing and bring you coffee, and a third guy that can sing. Right now, I think the time has come, I think, for many Japanese to, like in conferences like this or in places that I sing, to start thinking, either use cases or what are things that are unique to Japan, and how do we innovate? I think the innovation, I noticed that with younger folks are starting to happen, and it's a very, very, very good things. China may be backward, maybe much more backward than Japan in everyday life, but I think there's one thing that, being Chinese, I can say that, and I think the Chinese never take anything as is. They always said, is there, can I do it better? Can I make more money? Actually, that's the real reason. Can I make more money, right? And I think that thing is starting to happen. That attitude is happening in Japan, just to don't take things for granted and just look at asking questions, why are we doing the same thing over and over again? I think that's happening. And I'm very glad, and I think, this conference should do more of that to encourage people to ask more questions, encourage people to kind of try to do something a little bit different.
Thank you so much. で、それはまとめとして、
Then, as a summary, we've talked about the fact that the percentage of cashless transactions are just 20% in Japan, but they want to make it 40% in 2025, and they've also said that they want to strive eventually to reach 80% cashless. And apparently, it's costing 1 trillion yen for the cash transactions, which means about 10,000 yen per person is the burden that we must bear because of cash payments. And also, if we consider the time necessary to count the money, it could be about 30 minutes of wasted time per store per day. That's a big waste. So we have heard from Singapore and from India and China, and I have visited EDPE, and I believe that when the GDP per capita of Singapore exceeded that of Japan, I told them that it was an incredible thing. But then it was mentioned that Singapore is a small nation of 5.6 million, whereas you have 120 million in Japan. And it's because we are a small nation that Singapore is able to do this, was what I was told. But we have 1.3 billion people in India. But in a matter of 1 year, there have been 300 million bank accounts opened, and there has been the ID system where registration of 1.3 billion was carried out in a matter of 4 years. Now, we only have a population of 120 million here in Japan. And so by moving forward with digital cashless payments as we head towards the Olympics and beyond, I think that Japan can make tremendous progress. I'm confident of this. And I think that if we look at Singapore, India, and China, I believe that we were very fortunate to learn about what has happened there. And so let us offer a round of applause to the three speakers. Thank you very much for your participation.